Camping has always been a quite an experience to me, even as a kid and even I was growing up. I very enjoyed it. Even I was with my family or some friends. But there is one particular camping trip that really stood out to me the most. I was about 25 years old when this all happened, but I wasn't alone. I actually had my girlfriend Rachel, my best friend Adam, and Victoria, Adam's girlfriend, also experienced it with me. In fact, all of us are the same age. Well, this happened when we were in fact 25. It's been a couple of years now since this all happened. But before then, we did have some camping trips together, but not to this particular extent. You see, it all happened some years ago when we wanted to do something particular for the winter holiday. And I came up with this idea. Since my family has a cabin in Alaska, and since we all had a winter break holiday for the winter holiday, but this happened shortly after Christmas season, just mentioned. And since me and Rachel were living together, I had mentioned about my family's cabin in Alaska, and since we both are average skier, so I thought, why not to go for a ski trip or a skiing trip to Alaska for about a week? And she was all on board the whole idea. And when I mentioned this idea to Adam, my best friend, and he actually was excited, even when he told this about to Victoria. She was all on board. So I did ask my family, especially my parents, for permission if we can use the cabin for about a week. And they were okay about it. Since it had been passed down from my grandfather to now to my dad, and eventually it will either to be me or one of my siblings. Eventually. So we had the permission to go there. So we packed all the things that we required, like skis, winter clothes, and all that. And we were actually living in Ohio. So we flew to Alaska a few days later. There, we took a small helicopter to get down to the cabin, since the cabin was located in remote wilderness. And there was no roads or anything like that. And there was no any big lakes to land on. And since it was middle of the winter, the lakes was solidly frozen, so no planes could even land on that one. So we took the helicopter to the cabin, and on the right there we can see everything from the windows. The girls were they were amazed to see the far wide Alaskan wilderness. I have been to Alaska many times before during summer or winter season, but this was the first time they ever seen it themselves, and it was amazing. They even mentioned this is amazing. Oh, look, is that a moose? And is that a reindeer? But soon we finally arrived toward the spot that the helicopter landed. Since the helicopter couldn't land near any closer to the cabin, since the cabin was located in the woods, so it was impossible for the helicopter to even land even close to that. So we had to walk half of a mile in the deep snow. And even though there was quite of a walk with the package, with all the food and all the gears that we brought with us, but when they saw the cabin, it was all worth it. The cabin was a bit of small, your average cabin size, how to say it. It's actually, it's about, has a second floor to it. I had explained it has one massive bedroom, two smaller bedrooms, and a decent living room. And due to remote location, it had to be installed solar panels for power, and the nearest neighbors, considering it as a neighbors, is about 3 miles away. And that cabin, those neighbors, are usually only there for the summer or the winter holiday, like as myself. So even if we would need any particular neighbors or for them help, it would not necessarily mean that they would even be there at the time. So we were completely insulated in this time. But we got inside. I immediately quickly made a fire in the open fireplace, and they all went to the rooms that they were staying. Me and Rachel took the massive bedroom, and Adam and Victoria took one of the smaller rooms. And after we settled down, we start once again. They thanked me for inviting them. Then I told them, I'm just glad that they were able to do this with them, since they mean so much to me. Since I have known Adam since basically since first grade, I got to learn Victoria and Rachel in high school. So I had known them for many years. And I wanted to have them experience the Alaskan winter, even for about a week. So I told them to have as much fun they wanted. I even in the later afternoon, I went outside to cut some more firewood just in case if they were needed. And we actually didn't do much the first day we arrived, since we arrived in sometimes early noon. We were decided just to spend the first day there indoors, just to relax and just have a good time. But the very next day, we took our skis and we skiing around in the woods and some of the hills nearby, and it was just so much fun. We even did some hiking in the woods, and it was peaceful. We could see some tracks after some animals like rabbits, deers, and moose. It was just a very peaceful environment. Due to this remote location and the nearest neighbors was like 3 miles away, it was just perfect. But then it was actually Adam that pointed out there were some dark storm clouds in the distance. We actually saw that. We saw those clouds, and I remember hearing on the radio that there was a storm that would be approaching. So we decided to go back before the storm even was approached. I managed to get some more firewood since just for safety. So that sometimes these storms could be pretty bad. And since we had solar panels for power, and with this so that the storm will block out the sunlight for well, for some time, we really couldn't be relying on the solar panels' energy, even the generators, for enough heat for that. So we had to have enough firewood to keep at least the heat inside. And it was a good thing I managed to do that, because when I finished cutting the firewood, the snow started to fall. It was until like in the evening after snow had increased a lot more, and the wind had increased its speed too. We could all hear the wind howling outside, but we were glad to be indoors in the warmth and safety of the cabin. But despite that we were now in a warm place, I looked a bit uneasy. It wasn't like until when Adam asked me why I looked so uneasy as I looked out from the window. Even though it was pitch black outside, and even though I could see some of the snow falling, I told him that the storms in Alaska sometimes can last for a little while, sometimes for several days. And I wasn't sure if we had enough food for that. But Rachel assured me that even if they would make it out, and storm would even last that long. And even though she had a good point, but the storm sometimes in Alaska can last for several days. And due to the fact that was so remote, like several miles from the nearest town, and even the nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. And like I said earlier, due to the fact that the nearest neighbor was so far from us, and also and since that cabin was not necessarily was occupied during the same time as we were occupying this particular cabin. Cause if we needed help, even if me or Adam would go to this neighbor's cabin and found it empty, we would realize we had walked 3 miles there and back for no one even being there. The cabin of our neighbors could have been unused for months. So we were on our own. And we didn't have any particular cell phone um, reception up there. Sometimes it was sporadic. Sometimes we could have good signal, sometimes we didn't. So sometimes we didn't even have much Wi-Fi at all. So we couldn't just be rely on the cell phones for much of that. So I just was hoping the storm even would last that long. It could last just for just 2 days, 3 days, or even as for a week. So I was just hoping for this for that. But as the very next day, the storm was still going on and hasn't even declined in strength at all. Since we couldn't even go outside to spend some their time, we were just indoors playing cards, reading to pass time. And for it lasted for the next few days. And the food we had with us started to dwindle too. So to make it last a bit longer, without knowing in fact how long the storm would last, I came up with a reason, the decision to ration the food. So instead of having a normal size, decent, full portion of food, I will only given Rachel like an order to only prepare half of the food for all of us to make it last a bit longer. We all agreed it was a good idea because, well, we have no idea how long the storm will last. But if the food would dwindle, if the food was being all out, if we would have ran out of food, well, we would have had to make this hard decision to leave the cabin, to walk to the nearest cabin, our neighbor, even knowing the fact if there was no one there. So, after 3 days, the storms seems to finally be stopping, and it was about noon. The storm finally has stopped. We were just happy to hear that. We decided to stay just one more day in the cabin before contacting for the helicopter to pick us up. So we all agreed it was a good call, since we basically had almost no food left. And the food that we had left only lasted for breakfast the next day though. And during the day after the storm had passed, we spent some of the afternoon just walking around, and the next day we managed to get at least one good signal back, called for the helicopter to pick us up at the same spot they dropped us off. We left the cabin, walked around, even though the snow was a little more deeper compared to when we first arrived. But it was just that. We arrived at a spot, the helicopter came and picked us up. Even the pilot even asked us how we had been doing since the snowstorm. Adam joked that we were cooped inside for a whole time, reading, playing cards, and all that, just not to lose our minds. The pilot laughed about it and said, it's understandable, and this type of snowstorms happen here quite often. So, when we got home, we told our families about the experience. They were just happy that we were safe, and that they also thanked me for to make this good decision to stay indoors, ration the food so that it would last a bit longer without knowing. I actually had experienced some Alaska snowstorms before when I was a bit younger with my family. And well, it was just that. But not like this though, but this is a memory that neither of us will never forget. You may wonder, did we ever go back to the cabin during this afternoon experience? Some may think like, no, after this type of experience they will never even want to go back there in the winter. Well, the fact is, we did. We had actually come back to the cabin again, sometimes in the summer for summer vacation, and then of course we did some swimming, hiking, fishing, all that. And of course, even during the winter. Sometimes it was just me and Rachel that went there, or we went there with my whole family, or just sometimes just, or with Adam and Victoria. We were actually, despite having this snowstorm experience, we didn't allow that to stop us. In fact, even ever since then, we actually had rented sometimes a cabin in our own state, or even a neighbor state for holiday, because this somehow brought us all together. I was kind of almost thinking if that some of us would lose our minds to the fact being insulated so long with no outside contact. Like I said, we had sometimes sporadic messages. We couldn't even communicate with our family back home due to the fact all this happened. So even if we managed to get one bar signal on our phones, even last that long, maybe for about a minute or so. So even if we would managed, we only had that. And what about walkie-talkies or satellite phones? Well, satellite phones I didn't have enough. Wasn't they were a little bit too expensive for me to read to get. And walkie-talkie, yeah, that's the problem. They only have a short distance. What about the shortwave radio? Well, I did suggest this to my parents just have one installed just in case. And they agreed. So we have a small short distant wave radio in the cabin. Just for that. So this was my probably second or third snowstorm experience at the family Alaskan cabin. And it somehow bonded me with Rachel a lot more because, well, like I said, we have sometimes been there just by ourselves. So, yeah, let's hope that we wouldn't have not necessarily have to experience anything remotely to that again. Even though I didn't like it much or hate it, it's just that they for safety not only for myself but the others. So yeah, thank for everyone for listening to this particular story. I'm just glad to have it out there. Thank you.